They say your home is your castle. But what happens when the people who are supposed to protect your neighborhood start climbing your fence like you're the criminal? Imagine sitting on your porch, minding your own business, and seeing the same patrol jump your gate again. What would you do? Well, one man had enough. And instead of calling the cops, he wired up his gate with electricity and waited. What happened next? That's the story you won't forget. This isn't just about a fence or some petty neighborhood drama. It's about respect. It's about what happens when rules are enforced differently depending on who you are, what you look like, and where you live. This story comes out of a community where a black homeowner was targeted by his HOA patrol again and again. They didn't knock, they didn't call, they climbed his fence. Over and over. And when he finally fought back, the whole neighborhood felt the shock, literally. But before we get to the electrified gate, we need to rewind and understand why this battle was brewing for so long. Homeowners associations, HOAs, are supposed to keep neighborhoods clean, safe, and organized. But in practice, they're some of the most controversial organizations in America. Some people call them little dictatorships with power to tell you what color to paint your house or what flowers you can plant in your yard. And if you push back, they can fine you, sue you, or even take your home. Now, in this particular neighborhood, HOA patrols were supposed to enforce rules like noise complaints, parking violations, or keeping lawns trimmed. But here, where things started to cross the line, the patrol in this story didn't stay on the sidewalk. They didn't issue warnings through the mailbox. They started jumping fences. Think about that. Strangers, supposedly hired for security, trespassing on your property like they own it. And guess whose fence they climbed the most? The black man on the block. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus had lived in the neighborhood for years. He paid his dues, followed the rules, and kept his property sharp. But it didn't matter. To the HOA patrol, he was always suspect, always the one they came after, always the one they tested. The first time Marcus caught them climbing his fence, he was shocked. He asked, "Why are you on my property?" They mumbled something about inspection. But he hadn't gotten any notice. He hadn't broken any rules. Still, he let it slide. The second time, he was angry. He filed a complaint with the HOA board. He was told it would be handled internally. But nothing changed. The third time, that's when Marcus knew this wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. And if you've ever been in his shoes, you know exactly how that feels. That gnawing sense that you're being watched more closely than everyone else, that the rules don't apply equally, that no matter what you do right, someone is waiting for you to slip up. Now ask yourself, if this was happening to you, how many chances would you give before you decided enough was enough? Marcus wasn't just frustrated, he was tired. He was tired of being singled out in his own neighborhood. He was tired of strangers acting like they owned his property. And deep down, he knew this wasn't just about fences. This was about power. This was about control. This was about the same story black folks have been living with for generations, rules that shift depending on who you are. So Marcus started looking for solutions. He thought about cameras. He thought about motion lights. He even thought about calling the police. But here's the thing, calling the cops on an HOA patrol wasn't going to fix anything. The same system that let them jump his fence in the first place would probably side with them. And Marcus knew how those encounters can turn deadly for black men. So instead of putting his life in their hands, he decided to take matters into his own. And that's when the idea hit him, electrify the gate. Not enough to kill, but enough to shock. Enough to send a message, stay off my property. But here, where the story gets deeper, electrifying a fence isn't just some backyard project. It's a statement. It's saying, you pushed me so far that I had to protect myself in ways I never thought I would. And it speaks to a bigger truth. When you feel like no one listens, when the system fails you, you start finding your own ways to fight back. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear what happened the night he finally flipped the switch. Marcus sat on his porch waiting. The night was quiet. The air was heavy. He knew the patrol's routine. They always came around late, flashlights in hand, walking like they owned the place. And sure enough, here they came. One of them looked around, then walked right up to Marcus's fence. Without hesitation, he grabbed the gate to pull himself over. Zap! The shock hit him instantly. Not enough to cause permanent harm, but enough to send him stumbling back, yelling out. The other patrol member froze, not sure what had just happened. And Marcus, he sat there on the porch, calm as ever, watching. Because this time he wasn't the one caught off guard. This time the tables had turned. Do you think the cop went too far? Comment your thoughts. Word spread fast. Neighbors heard the commotion. Some laughed, some whispered, some were shocked literally and figuratively. The HOA board scrambled. How could they explain why their patrol was climbing a resident's fence in the first place? They couldn't. And Marcus, he finally felt like the message had been delivered: stay out. But let's slow down and dig into why this moment mattered so much. Because if you've ever lived under an HOA, you know they don't just patrol for rules. They patrol for control. And in communities with mostly white homeowners, the one black family often gets more attention. From lawn height to holiday decorations, there's always some excuse to knock on their door. Marcus knew this wasn't about weeds or fences. It was about who belonged. It was about subtle racism dressed up as policy. And when you face that long enough, when your kids see it, when your family feels it, you can't just stay quiet. This story could have gone a different way. Imagine if Marcus had yelled. Imagine if he had pushed one of those patrol guards off his property. The headlines wouldn't read HOA trespasses. They'd say black man attacks security. That's the fear he lived with. That's why he chose electricity over confrontation. Because the shock might sting, but it wasn't deadly. It wasn't violent. It was just enough to flip the script. After the electrified gate incident, the HOA held an emergency meeting. People wanted answers. Some neighbors defended Marcus, saying, if they hadn't been trespassing, nothing would have happened. Others clutched their pearls, asking, but what if a child touched that gate? The truth is, Marcus had thought of that. The electricity only triggered when someone tried to climb or force the latch. He wasn't careless. He wasn't out for blood. He was just done being disrespected. The patrol officers filed a report, but even they were embarrassed to admit what happened. Because the bigger question wasn't about the shock, it was about why they were on his property at all. And here, where the story ties back to the bigger struggle. Too often when black people defend themselves, the focus shifts. People forget the root of the problem. They stop asking, why was the fence climbed? And start asking, why was the gate electrified? See the difference? One frames Marcus as the victim. The other frames him as the aggressor. That's the game. That's the narrative. And Marcus knew it. That's why he sat silent at the meeting, calm, unshaken, letting the board trip over their own words. This story isn't just about one fence. It's about centuries of black people being told they don't belong. From redlining that kept us out of certain neighborhoods, to the constant suspicion when we move in, to the HOAs that find reasons to nitpick and harass. It's all part of the same cycle. Think about it. A white homeowner paints his house the wrong shade, he gets a warning letter. A black homeowner misses a fee payment, he gets threatened with foreclosure. Same rules, different weight. So when Marcus wired that gate, it wasn't just about that one patrol officer. It was about sending a message to the whole system. I will not be disrespected in my own home. And if you think Marcus went too far, ask yourself this. How many times do you let someone cross your line before you defend it? Now here's the twist. Just when Marcus thought he had peace, the HOA tried one last move. They sent him a letter threatening fines for unsafe property modifications. They wanted him to remove the wiring. They wanted him to bow down. But Marcus, he didn't just roll over. He knew the law, he knew his rights. And he had proof, video proof of the patrol climbing his fence without permission. Proof that put the HOA on defense for the first time. And if you think that was bold, wait until you hear what happened when Marcus took them to court. That's a whole other story. This story isn't just about a fence or even about an HOA. It's about what happens when people get pushed too far. It's about the struggle for respect, for safety, for equality. For Marcus, the electrified gate wasn't just about keeping people out. It was about saying, "This is my home. I deserve the same peace and respect as anyone else." And that's what makes this story so powerful, because it speaks to something bigger. How many times do we see systems that are supposed to protect us turn against us? How many times do we watch rules get twisted depending on the color of your skin? And how many times do we have to remind the world, enough is enough? So when you hear about a man wiring up his gate, it's not just a crazy story. It's a lesson. A lesson about what happens when you push people too far. A lesson about standing your ground. And a lesson about the price of respect. Subscribe if you felt this story hit home. When we left off, Marcus had shocked not just the patrol guard but the entire HOA system. The electrified gate wasn't just a defense mechanism, it was a statement. But the story didn't end there. Because the HOA wasn't about to let a black homeowner challenge their authority without striking back. And that's when things took a new turn, the courtroom. A week after the incident, Marcus received a thick envelope in his mailbox. Not just a letter, not just a fine, an official notice from the HOA's attorney. They claimed his electrified gate was a hazard and violated community safety rules. They demanded he remove it immediately. If he didn't, they threatened daily fines, escalating penalties, and even legal action. Now here, where it gets twisted, the same HOA that had no problem with their patrol guards climbing his fence without permission suddenly cared about safety when Marcus took steps to protect himself. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. They wanted Marcus to know they were still in charge. But Marcus wasn't the type to back down. Not this time. He'd spent too long being quiet, too long letting things slide. So instead of tearing down the wires, he picked up his phone, called his cousin, who just happened to be a lawyer, and said, "Let's fight." The weeks leading up to the court date were tense. Marcus gathered every piece of evidence he could. Photos of the patrol guards climbing his fence. Video footage from his security cameras. Copies of the complaints he had filed with the HOA that were ignored. He built a case brick by brick, determined not just to win, but to expose the hypocrisy. His cousin, Lisa, was sharp. She knew the law, but more importantly, she knew how these battles played out for black homeowners. She warned Marcus, "They're going to try to paint you as aggressive, reckless, a danger to the community, but we're not going to let them control the story." And she was right, because when you're black in America, the fight isn't just about facts, it's about perception. One wrong word, one wrong expression, and suddenly you're the villain. Marcus knew that. He had lived it, and this time he was ready. The courthouse was buzzing the morning of the hearing. Neighbors showed up out of curiosity, some in support, others hopping to see Marcus put in his place. The HOA board members sat together in their suits, whispering among themselves, confident they had the upper hand. When the case was called, the HOA's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of Marcus as a reckless man who endangered the community with his homemade electric contraption. He spoke of children, delivery workers, and visitors who could have been seriously harmed. He spoke with polished words, but the undertone was clear. Marcus was a threat. Then it was Lisa's turn. She stood tall and calm, her voice steady as she laid out the facts. She showed the judge the video footage of the patrol guards climbing Marcus's fence. She read aloud the ignored complaints. She reminded the court that trespassing is illegal, whether done by a stranger or by a patrol guard. And then she delivered the knockout. If my client had not taken steps to protect his property, how many more times would his rights have been violated? The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward, asking the HOA lawyer a simple question. Why were your patrol guards on Mr. Johnson's property without notice or consent? The lawyer stammered, dodged, tried to spin, but the judge wasn't buying it. For the first time, the HOA looked cornered. Their own actions had come back to bite them. They couldn't justify the trespassing. They couldn't erase the evidence. And the more they tried to push the narrative of Marcus being the aggressor, the more foolish they looked. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered a full review of the HOA's patrol practices and temporarily barred them from entering Marcus's property without written notice. The fines, suspended. The demand to remove the wiring, put on hold. Marcus had won the first round. When Marcus walked out of that courthouse, he wasn't just walking out a free man, he was walking out a symbol. Some neighbors shook his hand, thanking him for standing up. Others kept their distance, still loyal to the HOA. But one thing was certain: the power dynamics had shifted. Marcus had shown that he wasn't afraid to fight back and win. At home, his kids hugged him, his wife cried. For once, they didn't feel like outsiders in their own neighborhood. They felt seen. They felt proud. But deep down, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. HOAs don't take kindly to being embarrassed. And the board wasn't going to just roll over. They would regroup. They would come back. The question was, how far would they go? Sure enough, a month later, the HOA launched what they called a neighborhood compliance campaign. Suddenly, Marcus's mailbox was stuffed with violation notices. A weed too tall, a trash can left out too long, paint on the window frame slightly chipped. They nitpicked everything, piling on the pressure, trying to break him. But Marcus saw it for what it was: retaliation. And instead of getting angry, he got strategic. He documented everything. Every notice, every photo, every visit. He built a second case, this time not just against the patrol, but against the entire board. And here, where things took another wild turn, Marcus discovered that the HOA had been selectively enforcing rules for years. One neighbor had cars parked on the street for weeks with no penalty. Another had peeling paint for months with no notice. But Marcus, he got fined within 24 hours of the smallest thing. The discrimination was clear as day. Marcus knew he had them cornered again. He was ready to take them back to court, this time not just for trespassing but for harassment and discrimination. But just as he was preparing his case, something unexpected happened. One of the patrol guards, the same one who got shocked by the gate, showed up at Marcus's door. Not in uniform, not with backup. Just him standing there nervously, asking if they could talk. What he revealed that night would change everything. Do you think the patrol guard came to apologize, or to warn Marcus about something bigger? Comment your thoughts.